This episode of the This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zapper. Zapper is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the last 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They're democratizing AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zapper worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zapper a call, or you can visit zapper.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink. I'm here with Ted Schilwitz. It's Friday, June 23rd, and it's This Week in XR. Good morning, Ted.
Morning, Charlie. Nice to see you as always for our Friday jaunt.
You look great. Are you feeling recovered?
I am what I would, well, the technical term is I'm done with my short-term recovery. So for those that just happen to be listening to this podcast for the first time today, I had heart surgery a couple months ago. And now the long-term recovery, which is basically 6 months or so of a little bit guarded stuff, but I'm back to doing everything, traveling. I was at a business conference this week talking about AI, as you might imagine, which is the hottest topic on the planet. So back to normal, which is good. Thanks for asking.
So it looks like Rony is not going to be joining us. He's in Switzerland. He was kind of teasing it yesterday, but I don't see him. If he arrives, we'll bring him right in. But let's get to the top of the news, which is really fun this week, because Elon and Zuck look like they are going to have some kind of a cage fight. At first, Zuck was saying Vegas, and I was thinking TV, but of course, today people are saying it's going to be on Twitter and Facebook Live or Instagram Live. So that would be more convenient. Although,
do you really think it's going to happen? Do you actually legit think they're going to like throw down in the ring, gloves, MMA style? Like
I don't know, but I will say that that Musk, who of course is not a very athletic guy, even though he's 4 or 5 inches taller than Zuck.
Dude,
yeah, he's a big dude. And that's why he suggested in a tweet that he was going to pull the walrus, which is lay on top of Zuck, because that would be his only move, because Zuck looks very trim and buff right now.
Here's the only thing I would very, very humbly request, if they actually do this, is that they make the pay-per-view a charity thing. Meaning,
they have to, right?
Then you donate a couple bucks to charity via Twitter, via Facebook, via whatever you want, and hundreds of millions of dollars go to many worthy charities as opposed to their own coffers. That would be a nice thing. If they really want to fight each other to the death, then they should make all the money go to charity.
The money should go to research into the social harms of social media.
Exactly right.
But you know, the fun part is, of course, there's people who are jumping in, like MMA stars who want to train Musk. So it's a fair fight. And then I would say, if Musk really could do that kind of training, I think he would have. Does not seem like something that would keep his attention for very long.
It's just, the comedy of life that we all in is that this is what we have to talk about today. Right?
No, well, it was a kind of a slowish news week. There's a company called Kobold Metals that just raised $200 million from all the usual suspects. The Bill Gates Fund and Andreessen Horowitz and so forth, and they're going to use AI to assist in mining. Is that an AI story? I was going to ask you that.
Well, it's indicative of this, like what I refer to. I was at this big conference in Utah this week, and there was the topic du jour, of course, is everything AI. And what you start to discover after a while is when you get a foundational shift in technology, you immediately get the many service layers on top of it, right? So it is people building on top of something that they have felt like they've discovered and got the inline on, and investor froth, which we've seen multiple times in our lives, around, is this the service layer that's going to mean something that's going to be beneficial? I certainly think any kind of advances in mining where they can use, like, we know that miners of all forms now use LiDAR, right? Extensively to scan the earth. And as opposed to just doing test drilling, they actually use a technology called LiDAR, to actually see what's under the ground, and they can be more focused that way. Using AI mechanics to do that, maybe it's a parlor trick and maybe it's real, but if they could raise 200 bill to pull it off, then good on them.
So they've raised 400 to date. So it looks like they're gonna they've sold a lot of equity.
Yeah, $400 million is a significant amount
Yeah.
of money to prove something out, right? So
Yep.
they're obviously investors believe.
But I have to suspect that every mining company, I was at the Hexagon conference 2 weeks ago. They're a big international tech digital transformation company. And one of the things they try and do is work with mining companies and work with, big agricultural conglomerates to use mapping and other 3D technologies. So it very much was not only an XR conference, but, they crunch all this data and they call it AI.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, these service layer companies that we're talking about are always hunting for where the money wells are, right? Like, where are the veins of dollars that are not consumer level, spending a little money on something fun like, doing your term paper in AI, but actually using it for an enterprise level thing, which they can make real money on. So I get it. It totally makes sense.
So here's another AI story. This is more right in our strike zone, which is Elven Labs, which is the company that creates essentially character-based soundtracks based on text prompts, has raised $19 million. So and they're from a lot of insiders like Instagram co-founder Mike Krieger and Brendan Iribe and Mustafa Suleiman, who and O'Reilly Media. So it's the insider media. But is there a professional application to this? I mean, I know that there's an enterprise application, but is there a way this could be used to create professionally produced mainstream entertainment?
Well, it's a broader question, right? Which is another thing that we talked about at this conference this week. I think it's in a lot of people's blogs, it's in a lot of discussion points, is where are we sitting with the arc of AI as it relates to creative pursuits, right? And the idea of, we've seen voice generation for years, right? So this is yet another service layer on this. But again, they've raised capital, so they obviously have something to show and something to prove. But I've seen
and by the way, amateur producers, or I should say low budget producers like Ed Sachi and Eugene Chung, who generally produce very first class content, or at least have in our mediums in VR. And they've been using it in AI experiments, and it's certainly good enough for the kinds of things they're producing, which I assume will be more kind of dreamy and ethereal, because that seems to be what AI produced content does best, that in science fiction and girls with guns.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a cost saving measure, right? It's an efficiency tool when profit is harder and harder to make in the entertainment business, which is clear if you watch the stock market these days and what large entertainment companies are going through as their next sort of moment of zen, as we would say.
Well, and it's also a moment of strikes, because labor is part of this. Labor is part of both the problem and the solution. So they need a seat at the table.
Right. But, when you start to study it through a lens of how technology affects industries, there was something I was listening to the other day. Oh, it's part of this NPR series that they're doing on AI. And they were studying AI through the lens of one of the biggest labor shifts and labor displacements of all time in recent time was about a century ago, when you and I needed to make a phone call. If we were alive then, you had to use a phone operator, and she patched.
Right.
It was the largest employer of women in first world and second world countries. Basically, these patch boards where you and I need to call each other. You can't just call each other directly. You have to get through the phone operator. And then there was an automation moment in that phone operation system, and essentially all of those workers and all of those newsreel footage that we see of the women poking in the patch cords were almost instantly gone. Like within a year, it was all gone. That business was gone. So they were making a really interesting point that the analog of that today is various forms of AI. There will be things that will be displaced almost immediately and still have a little vestige of the leftover, kind of like bank tellers and ATMs, right? Where when you automate something so effectively and so efficiently, then the immediate need for the human labor just starts to dissipate very quickly. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see moments of that where things that used to require a lot of human labor will literally go away very quickly.
Yeah, my concern when this happens, of course, is what we're doing is the social consequences are socialized, right? All these unemployed workers become the responsibility of you and I, but the cost savings goes to the enterprises.
Right. So it's a power broker thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing a centralized economy like the one China has an advantage, because they can regulate the speed of displacement, which is something in the United States that the government has no right to do.
Yeah.
So, here's a bright and cheery piece of news. Second Life has turned 20.
How about that?
We have, I want to congratulate the Linden Lab founders, Philip Rosedale and Brad Oberwager, who bought and is running the place, I guess, bought it 2 years ago from I think it was Benchmark, one of the venture capital firms that was trying to get out of its, try to close out its 2000 vintage fund. But it continues to be very profitable. It has 750,000 monthly unique visitors. And, they, even though, obviously 3D game worlds have gotten much bigger. I mean, you look at Fortnite with over 500 million users, and Second Life seems very quaint. But let us just repeat the firsts that they were responsible for, right? They were not only the first 3D game, but they were the first open sandbox, right, where there is no object to the game other than to live and socialize. Yeah. It was the first virtual creator economy. Yeah. They introduced their own currency, and they've made a very solid business out of being a bank, and they are registered as a bank, which is very unique. And so they were, as I said, part of what their charm was, that they introduced so many new ideas at once, and people who allowed themselves to get into it really were the first to experience the metaverse as we describe it today. Yeah.
So quaint and profitable and beneficial and logical. It's almost like, the little corner store in the town that just survives no matter what. Here comes Walmart, here comes Target, here comes everything. But there's always one little store that everybody loves and everybody goes to, or the little local coffee shop. It's hard to keep them alive, but the ones that do, you have to give a lot of credit.
It's it is a tribute to them, and also a proof that social media, once it becomes very sticky, and this speaks to Twitter for different reasons. Why do people stick with a platform like Second Life? Because they like it and they have friends there and they're familiar with it. They've often built 20 years of assets in there that they're reluctant to abandon. And in a way, that's what happens on Twitter. When you build a big following, you're reluctant to leave. I'm reluctant to leave Twitter, even though engagement has gone down and they've messed with the algorithm up and down. And LinkedIn is much more active now as a result, but I'm still reluctant to leave it, even though many people who were also in my spot have elected to leave it. So
do you think Blue Sky is getting any traction at all, or is it starting to prove that it's not? It's like Clubhouse. There was a moment where press
Blue Sky, yes, Blue Sky and Post are both excellent.
They're excellent, but are they locking in? Are they becoming?
I don't have enough people in them. I don't get any more engagement. Engagement is the holy grail. Forget about the number of followers or the number of users. Is it worth my time to post something that's just going to go by at 1 million miles an hour in everybody's feed and nobody will ever pay attention to it? I mean, all the social media sites now try and make sure they keep a relevant feed in front of you as often as possible, because they want you to engage. That's what keeps people on the apps. And as far as I can tell, the engagement, for very well-known personalities like Scott Galloway, is really just a fraction of what it is on a place. A controversial post by him can get tens of thousands of engagements. And, on posts he gets like 100 or 200.
It's order of magnitude smaller.
Yeah, and that means the comment strings are shorter and so forth. So I just think it's going to be hard. I think Elon Musk should be celebrating, because it's really going to be hard for him to lose many more users than he's already lost. And it would not be hard for him to get people back, especially if they started offering better services, right? So it's more than just chat, which is what he says he wants to build. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to the cage match. I don't know what the source of the cage match is. Is it the Twitter clone off of Instagram that they're going to compete with Twitter with? I mean, they have a chance just because of scale, right? Clearly scale is related to success. So Twitter, hit at exactly the right moment in 2009. People were getting into their smartphones. They were getting into the idea of living through these apps. So Twitter very well timed, and they vacuumed up 250 million users, and then they hit a wall. But it's not like it's completely disappeared. Anyway, two great guests today. Our friend John Gaeta, who is got more credentials than really God. He's worked with everybody, won an Academy Award for the bullet time effects in The Matrix. He was a senior VP for strategy at Magic Leap, where he worked closely with Rony. It's sad Rony isn't on the call. John actually introduced me to Rony while I was writing a book and doing a chapter on Magic Leap. So I was interviewing him, and he's like, "No, you have to meet Rony." So that was back in 2017. So I love John. Recently, he was one of the authors. I did not realize this. One of the authors of Vader Immortal, which ILMX made. He's working with our friend Matt Meisnikes. This whole thing is like a This Week in XR alumni association. So he's working with Matt Meisnikes on Living Cities, which is trying to make a digital twin of the physical world where we could actually interact, which is one of the most exciting ideas in XR, because it just suggests a whole new world of communications that would be the metaverse, right? And now he's chief. So that brings us to today. He is also chief creative officer of a new company created by a guy named Kylan Gibbs, who's an ex-DeepMind engineer, called inWorld. They were in the Disney Accelerator, which is how I first saw them. But they create characters for video games using AI.
Yeah, and John is a veteran of the podcast now, right? He's in the club.
John has been he's almost in the Green Jacket Club. I think this is going to be his third or fourth appearance. Let me bring the guys in.
Okay.
I can't wait to talk about this. I talked about this with them at AWE, and it's really fun to consider the implications of it.
Hey, great to be here, Charlie.
Hey, good to see you, Kylan. We were just on. There's John, and his label for those of you watching on YouTube is Perceptualist, which is as good a title for John Gaeta as I could come up with on my own. So, John, great to see you. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Hi, Charlie.
I was just telling Ted, one of your episodes, the most recent one, I think, where we were talking about living cities, is among our top 3 ever most downloaded episodes. So I guess people are interested in what you have to say.
Nice to know.
Yeah. So welcome back. And Rony, who also has a lot to say, is in Switzerland. He was at the Annecy Film Festival with his new short, and I guess is taking advantage of the travel to Europe. And Switzerland is great. So anyway, we are without Rony this morning.
Okay, he's skiing, no doubt.
So I was just describing what inWorld did. And what I saw at the Disney Accelerator was 3CPO powered by inWorld. And sort of he knows everything. The 3CPO knows everything about the Star Wars universe, including, all the arcane stuff, that has happened in the past 10 years since Disney's acquisition and their, very purposeful growth of the Star Wars universe. So are we ever going to see the sentient or AI-driven 3CPO again?
I hope
certainly. I hope so as well. Yeah, hard to say. It's it's up to us and our partners. So
yeah, I mean, if they somehow decided to put that in the Star Wars land or whatever, it would become super famous.
It would become instantly, yes, very, very popular. That level of engagement and experiential, is that thing really talking to me, is kind of an amazing thing, which kind of leads me to my sort of first question, which is, as Charlie and I are now continually talking about, and I'm sure you guys are as well, are you leveraging any forms of these large commercial AI models, these language models, to start to build what your goals were with inWorld, or is it a separate vein? Are you doing something different than what a lot of companies are building on top of OpenAI and these various chat GPT clients, and what Stability is doing and others are doing to create this type of interchange, right? This believable interchange of language. Is that something that inWorld is doing, or are you doing something different?
So when we first started the company, we of course just wanted to experiment with what was out there. So we started working with groups, like OpenAI and Microsoft, to use some of those commercially available models to get prototypes stood up. As we've progressed and team has grown, taken on funding, we've realized that a lot of these models ultimately are meant to serve all use cases, from code generation to marketing copy. And that means that the language that they're biased towards is very generic. It almost has this like AI persona. People, you can almost tell, like now, once you see enough of it, you can almost tell when you read something that's generated by it. And when you think about the, beloved characters that we know, there's much more to it than just, saying the right thing. It's how they say it. There's like these tones, the slight vocabulary shifts. And so we have started to train our own models that are really bespoke for this kind of idea of dialogue, as well as generating the actions and the emotions that are associated with that. And then we have like these generic models that we use for initial testing, and most of our creators use. But then when we work with larger groups, what we're starting to do is look into actually training custom models with them. So for example, taking Star Wars lore, to go with the example that Charlie shared, and actually training on that. And that means that sort of the character becomes more biased to the specific ways of speaking, the specific references in that world, maybe even metaphors, right? Like the metaphors you may use in one universe are different than another. And so all those slight things, right, pile up. And I'm just listing off a few things, but it's very hard to say. And so that's important as well, because we have a whole integrated system with voices and emotions and gestures that we're really trying to kind of build around. Of course, we can work with groups like OpenAI and others, and we love what they're building. We're just finding that as we're starting to step into the space of these performative AI powered actors effectively, it requires something more than these general horizontal models can provide.
So this plugin architecture that they announced just recently, that benefits you guys, you're able to use that, or is it still something completely customized that you're doing?
No, it's completely. So plugins are basically just a way to inject specific things into the prompts of GPT-4. It's not actually using any separate model. We're actually training our own models from scratch. So basically getting the GPUs, setting up the hardware, getting the data sets. And that gives us a lot more control as well over different parts of optimization that we can do for partners, and, eventually getting things onto the device, which is, of course, is very important for, scaling and economics. So, yeah.
So training your own models, number one, is no easy feat. And number two is expensive, right? I mean, you're talking about massive computer cycles and a lot of hardware and software geniuses to kind of be involved in that. So how are you navigating that in your world?
You're right. It is very complex and very expensive. But I think it's kind of like the next parallel we go into. Like, unfortunately, the days of building an internet website that, may take a few kids' time is no longer the way to build at least in this age of AI tech company. So yeah, we have, we've set up our own GPUs. We've got some amazing engineers coming out of Google and Microsoft, Amazon, other groups. And we've done a lot of work, not just to set up that hardware, but actually do a ton of data collection, work with partners as well to understand what are the kind of watch outs that we want to, look out for, to make sure there's little things, right? Like as we engage with creatives, is it going outside the boundaries of what it's supposed to? Is it speaking appropriately? Is it using, the types of tonality? So all those things are basically translated from our work dealing with creative partners into the work that our machine learning team does. And ultimately, we think that kind of gives us this kind of uniquely set model that will be able to produce these AI actors of the future.
The AI actors, let's talk about that a little bit, because this is such a new idea, right? These are like independent actors, and they don't follow a script. They're trained on the world and their priorities that the author of the game designer or the game writer builds in. So the writer's not writing dialogue, but the writer is very much creating the world, the context, and the dialogue. In a way, the writer has to create the whole world of the game and find a way to communicate that, it's 2036, you're on Mars, people from Mars don't like people from Earth, and so forth, right? And you have to make all that up for the character. Is that what the writer does now?
Yes, but one thing I would add, though, Charlie, is that you can add to your training data, examples of speech, of the way that things would be said, for example. and it's important because manner of speech is very important, obviously, for character persona. And so the writer can actually as well have influence there. I mean, any great character that we know from, anything that we watch and love, there's always distinctive style of speech. So there are ways of doing that as well.
I also want to add on some. Oh,
Sure.
Sorry. There's something I like to, a paradigm that I'm thinking about. So if you at least keep the metaphor of these characters as AI actors, I think one thing that they have is above human actors in at least the context of virtual worlds is they have superpowers, right? They can effectively read each other's minds. If you share something with one character, it could influence another. If you say a specific thing to a character or change its relationship state, it may cause an event to happen in the world. And in that sense, they are it's almost like the system plays both the role of the actor and the director and the VFX crew, right? All at once in sort of instantaneous form. And if in that way, you can kind of think about what you're really doing is like playing out a simulation overall, and each character acts as like a trigger to instigate something in the world. And that's important because characters don't just exist in a vacuum, they exist in terms of a story. And if you think about what you're doing is you're actually trying to orchestrate this play, but via your interactions with the character.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Oh, muted.
There's construction going on behind me. I don't know if you could hear it, so I'm trying to mute myself while you guys are talking. Although Zoom, by the way, has a great filtration system.
Yeah, I couldn't hear a thing. You were fine.
So how long does it take? What's the process of training one of your characters? Right. I mean, you guys are working on a game. I forget the name of it, just so you can become the best users of your own technology. And there's some pretty interesting characters. There's a robot detective and so forth. So how did they all get trained up? How long did it take?
Well, that particular one, really the answer is, minutes, or as long as you feel like evolving and optimizing the characters that you have and the behaviors that they have. The amount of information that you actually need to provide can be very, very minimal, and the character can be up and running literally in minutes. There are different ways that one can approach, putting an identity and persona over the top, which include, taking time to develop the common knowledge. The role and archetype particularly are very interesting to consider. So, for example, if a particular character is in, within an ensemble of characters in a world, that character obviously has a place in the world. It has a relationship to other characters, to the world, and you can take time to essentially write out its archetype independent of its persona. And what's interesting about doing it, starting that way, is that there can be other characters that fit into this archetype. So, imagine that one character type is a peasant that lives in a village, that lives in a kingdom, right? And from that point of view, they would only be able to know only so much about what might take place, let's say, in their village, right? And everybody in the village could understand more or less the broad things that are about the kingdom, who rules the general large history and knowledge of the kingdom, but they may be contained to their local world. And then within that, of course, they have a persona. It's this particular peasant, this person, right, with this background and motives and things of that nature. So why I'm pointing it out is because, and what makes it very interesting is when you start thinking about, casting many, right, to be mixed together, you can start from the idea of, determining what groups they're part of, where in the world they sit, and then who they are very specifically. If you want to give the power to, let's say, a player to essentially make an individual within a known world that they love, they could, let's say it's Star Wars again. So a protocol droid, has a very specific, sort of position in the droid, world. They do very specific things, right? And then of course, once they get out, they come out of the factory, they're assigned, or sort of begin their journey finding their master. and so along that criteria, you can say, okay, well, on top of this protocol droid archetype, I am now going to very specifically describe who it is, what their name is, who they're allegiant to, and what memories perhaps they've had, and more.
So those protocol droids you're talking about are almost a metaphor for your whole company, in terms of they're built with a small set of instructions, and then through the story fodder of Star Wars, when they go out into the world, they start to learn things on their own, and then either become good or evil or neutral or part of one narrative or another. So here's a philosophical question for you guys that I'm very curious how you'll respond to. So in all the work that you're doing as a startup, you of course have to stay laser focused on the mission at hand, right? And deliver, because you don't have a lot of extraneous resources and employees. How often do you think, I will ask you broadly the question, how often do you think about things like the terminology, what could possibly go wrong here? How often do you get to put any brain cycles and any work cycles into what Kylan mentioned as you were talking before? You said none of this exists in a vacuum, right? So gaming and gaming structure don't exist in a vacuum. People play it, people use it, people share it. There are bad agents around the world that can do bad things with assets and have often done it. So I'll go back to the question. How often do you guys get to think about, or anybody on your team get to think about, what could possibly go wrong and how do you protect against it?
I mean, every day, hours a day.
Really?
I don't really know what people think happens within AI companies. But basically, like, we can't work with a partner if it's not going to be safe, right? And so there's a variety of things. So, there's like technical issues that could go wrong. So, you're inside of a critical, let's say you're talking to an AI therapist and it goes down, right? So we have groups that are always thinking about how to make sure that it's reliable and scalable and these systems work. I think what you're mainly referring to is on the LLM side. So, all the way from when we train our models, the way that we build our architectures, the data sets that we collect, everything in there, we're basically pulling out anything that could even inspire, basically even train in the capacity for certain types of hate speech, certain types of, let's say invoking violence against specific groups, certain types of language that are all basically almost not even within the mind of the possible creations of the character. Then we have an entire team that's devoted to safety. So those teams basically work on a variety of filters. So for example, actually blocking if a player or any user inputs language that may trigger unsafe or provocative behavior, we actually block that and filter that out. Then we have transformations inside. So let's say, a user says something that could invoke something somewhat unsafe, but it's basically just like, which king should I attack, right, in a fantasy game? We actually try and detect, is that, appropriate within the specific game? Or is this, let's say, if you were even within a game saying like, hey, Charlie, do you hate this specific group, right? And the character within the game could say yes, that you also don't want to invoke that because that has real world consequences. So then we block that as well. And then before the character even says anything else, we have basically a variety of filters that detect, is there something that was specifically talking about this topic? Let's say it's a kid's game and you don't want to talk about substance abuse, politics, finance, those kinds of things. Block all of those. And we allow, developers to select different settings so that it's appropriate for the world. And then we also have a variety of vocabulary that are actually disallowed. And so by the time you go through all of that, there's a heck of a lot that's done. And for every single partner, there's an additional layer of filters that we actually add in. So that's basically just what's horizontally, universally available. And then, there's basically a lot of it going on.
That's great. That actually makes me feel really good that you had such an extensive answer to that, because Charlie will probably nod his head and tell you, when we ask that kind of question to a lot of groups, which we do on this podcast and in other places around our travels and our work day, we often get sort of a generic talking point of, oh yeah, we're totally on it. And then when you press them and say, well, what does that mean? They have no answer other than the real truth answer is they'll get to it at some point, right? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're authentically really caring about this, which I think is a very strong ethical code for your company.
I mean, imagine being us. We very purposefully, very early on, put ourselves in the sort of, how would I put it, in the oversight of Disney in terms of standards and for safety, right? We very quickly subjected ourselves to the very high bar requirements to be able to, create sort of safe, even family, basically family forward capabilities, right? I just say capabilities because, every piece of entertainment that eventually AI will be used for, it could span the entire spectrum. And of course, you're going to really need to customize around what the property is, right? You don't want to neuter, certain kinds of content, because the world is whatever it happens to be, right? It has to be catered to the world. But I mean, like the intent here is to, essentially provide, a new paintbrush for entertainment per se and new forms of entertainment generally. So that has to be able to get to mainstream, and it has to be safe for audiences. I mean, I could right here as we talk type anything I want to into Google, and I could get all manner of scary things back. One word. If I put one word right here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's already part of our culture, right? The ability to access questionable things, but it's definitely important to us because there needs to be predictability for brand. There needs to be predictability, for age groups, and so that is something that's like literally it's. I would actually say it's probably one of the top priorities.
Could you create the perfect politician?
Within the game world? Wow, that's a good question, Charlie.
No, I mean the AI are smart, but they, in the same way that even now it's like, it'll probably be easier to create the perfect podcast guest, and it would probably be interesting for you to bring an AI in here, but probably not have the specific specificity, sensitivity of the types of answers that we give. And I think a politician has to be even more like universal. The interesting thing though is it depends what you think politicians do, whether they actually develop like novel ideas or they just go towards the mean, because basically what these models are trained to do, at least the ones that are trained on the entire internet and kind of horizontal use cases, is they're meant to kind of convey the most average statement to any given utterance, right? So it could, for example, at least give you an approximation of what most people would have responded to that question like, and that could be interesting for use in politics and these kinds of things.
That's a super good idea, by the way, what you brought up. Charlie, we should think about having an AI guest on the podcast and see how it goes. Maybe our in-world friends will help us achieve that. And I mentioned that NPR has been experimenting with this too. There was a couple of I think it's called Planet Money is their podcast that they do, one of the many NPR podcasts, but they have been using AI and testing like how dangerous it might be to their jobs and their process forward. But I think it's a good idea, Charlie. Don't you think we should have an AI guest at some point?
Well, Ed Saatchi tried to take Lucy out of the AI character who's the star of Wolves in the Wall. He tried to take Lucy out of that movie. And one year at South by Southwest, Lucy appeared as a filmmaker, right? She collaborated with several panelists to create a short film. And, another experiment Ed did was making Lucy your friend via text. So there's actually an emotional AI project, which has raised quite a lot of money just to be your personal companion. And it'll learn personal things about you and be kind of your pocket therapist or your pocket cheerleader. So a different way of thinking about a virtual assistant. But it does beg the question, do you think virtual assistants will have personalities? And do you think your technology could be perhaps something that drives that?
No doubt. I mean, that's, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the natural evolution, isn't it? I mean, personal assistants, well, if Rony was here, he'd have something to say about this right now. The idea of a companion is very obviously attractive to many, right? It could be the most attractive idea. the question is, what makes a perfect companion to you, right? What is the right, what kind of people do you attract as friends? What kind of people do you befriend? And like, why is that, right? What is it that you're attracted to? So there is definitely, there's definitely, the potential, right, of having compliments made to you. And the question is, what kind of friend do you want? Do you want a friend who just is subservient to you, or do you want a friend who's really like, there to prompt and provoke you, right, in really good ways, hopefully, mostly. So the answer is for sure. It's going to go in that direction. It is actually something I wondered about years back before I started getting involved with these guys. I always wondered, will these companies like Google or Microsoft, will they really start moving towards personified agents? And there's a big question: is that do you trust, Ryan? Do you trust these agents? Is like probably on top of the list. What does it take to actually feel trust for something that's virtual? And
I think
that's a big thing. Yeah.
There's also something I think generally, I know we're going to wrap up soon, that we see a lot of AI companies, I think, going after what I see as like these productivity use cases, right? Like helping people be more effective and efficient. I think the reality is most people work, let's say, on average, a maximum of 8 hours a day. And if you're actually working for 8 hours a day, wow, like you're good on you. Because I think most people spend most of their time engaging with some form of media or recreation that takes them out of their immediate surroundings. So whether that's watching a movie, playing a game, reading a book, the way we sort of entertain ourselves is by transporting ourselves to other worlds. And I think that's kind of like what we're focused on with inWorld is not necessarily just those productivity use cases, which I think are great, but there's lots of other folks also looking at that. But how do we create AI that improves the ability for people to engage in media the way that they enjoy, and the way that gives them that sort of satisfying extension of their current reality or their current world into these sort of immersive, fictitious worlds. And I think this is, for basically since, writing and reading, well, literacy at least began, and even oral storytelling, we've always been doing this. And this is how we've entertained ourselves and each other. And so I think that's sort of what we're mainly targeting.
So wrap up question. Where can we see your work? Where can a listener of this podcast start to understand or interact with the characters you're creating?
Yeah, if you just go to inWorld.ai, you can either go straight to our studio and create your own, or you can head to the demos and interact with characters. There's also games that we're now hosting there that are created by others. We also just released inWorld Origins, which John produced, which was released on Steam. So you can go there and download that. So I'm not sure, John, if you want to highlight any other projects.
Well, there's a lot in the hopper, but that's a good start. I would try. There's a lot going on over there at SteamFest. I would participate in that if you're interested this particular week. It's a good scene over there.
Say that again. I'm not sure that came through clearly for the listeners.
Go look up Origins on SteamFest this week.
Oh, SteamFest. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
That sounds great. SteamFest is the distribution platform for PC games. Yeah. Just in case listeners aren't aware of it, Ted, you had a hard stop at 8:45, and we hit it. We hit it hard. Kylan and John, always a pleasure to work with you guys. Your insights today were terrific. Good episode, right, Ted?
Yeah, terrific. Really interesting conversation today, guys. Thank you.
All right. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.